Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, a hotter sex life, or a powerful legacy. Find out how good your life can be on this episode of Man Alive. Also, as I've supported men in their love and work lives for 15 years now, many men have asked me for the right words to say to be more attractive, desirable, and more of a leader. And I've found it's not so simple as giving scripts or lines. Because at the root of a connected and affectionate relationship and being more effective and inspiring at work is your ability to influence others. But most often, influence is not gained or lost with words. It's from what I call the invisible factors. So I created a quick guide for you called 3 Ways Men Lose Influence at Work and with Women, so you can understand how these invisible factors work and what has women and colleagues both more inspired to say yes. I think you're also going to be surprised to find out the moment when your influence actually begins. So grab the guide for free at ShanaJamesCoaching.com/3ways. That's ShanaJamesCoaching.com/3 and the word ways, WAYS. Or you can text ALIVE to 44144. That's the word ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144. I hope you enjoy the guide and this episode. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Man Alive. I'm excited to be here today to talk about divorce and particularly alternative ways of handling divorce. And my guest, Doug Memmott. Doug, welcome.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Yeah, has come up with a really beautiful way of working with people going through the divorce process, and he calls it parting properly. And it's really a difference in that it departs from the system where there are separate attorneys, one for each person in the divorce, moving into a single mentor who actually doesn't even need legal experience to guide a couple through divorce. And having been through divorce myself, I know, that there are some really challenging times, and, I needed support as I was going through it. And what you've created, Doug, actually seems like something that would have been really helpful to me and my partner at the time. So, thank you for having the presence of mind and heart that you could actually see something totally different than, most people actually realize is possible.
I wish I could say it was an epiphany and it came to me in a flash, but it really did not. It was an evolutionary process. I initially started as a family law attorney late in my career, and then I discovered a process called collaborative practice. So I was trained in collaborative practice, which involves a separate attorney still for each party, but also a therapist for each party, and all parties, including the client, agree that they will not litigate. Mm-hmm. And it was successful. I was very successful in moving forward in that direction. And but I discovered some things about attorneys that I had already known, but that had not become as apparent as they became in a family law matter. And that was, it's very difficult to change the mindsets that are based upon having been trained as advocates, mm-hmm. and sometimes adversarial advocates. And so as a consequence of that, I started just taking on clients so I could represent both sides, because I knew that I could. I knew I could help mediate their problems, and what I discovered is that I could solve the problems, and again, it was successful. And even with some pretty high conflict couples, we managed to get to the agreement stage, and do things in a pretty common sense and practical way. But I then realized that I couldn't grow, because everybody is limited by the time constraints of their lives. And so then I thought, who are the folks that these people really need to be talking to? And what I determined was that they're usually mental health professionals. In fact, most of my referrals for divorce assistance for couples came from mental health professionals.
And mental health
And so
professionals, meaning therapists or coaches or people who are actually working with these people already.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, and that's right. And people who spend their careers learning how to deal with interpersonal relationships.
Uh-huh.
And so attorneys are really not well trained in interpersonal relationships.
Right.
I
love
all
that
the
you can
jokes.
even say that, being one yourself.
Exactly. And so I basically just realized that divorce particularly is not something that requires significant trained legal minds. There are only two rules in divorce that have to be applied in every instance.
This is
Most
in
of the
California or in the whole country, or?
In California particularly, but pretty much throughout the whole country. What the rules, when the rules are applied, it's a result of people litigating. And there had to be some means, and the system is not dysfunctional in that regard. When people decide they're going to fight with each other and let a judge make their decisions for them, then you have to impose rules.
Uh-huh.
And that's what the rules in terms of what's community property, what's separate property, how much spousal support should be awarded, what kind of custody
so for people who are
matters.
not litigating, and so this might be new for someone listening, right? If litigation is not happening, a lot of those rules just don't even apply.
They do not. There are only two. The two that apply are the provision that everybody must disclose all of the financial information they have regarding income, expenses, assets, liabilities, that sort of thing, to the other person. And that is enforced not only in the law, but also in the agreements that we put together.
Yeah.
And if they don't do that, there are significant penalties, but they do it, generally speaking, under mentorship.
Uh-huh.
And the other rule that has to be applied is that all agreements regarding children have to be for their best interests and their welfare.
Yeah.
Other than that, you don't have to say this is community property or separate property, and so I'm going to award it in this particular manner. You can say, hey,
this is what we're deciding. Fair? Yeah.
Yeah, what's fair?
You've seen a lot, right? I mean, you've been doing this for decades, and in all of these different ways, from being an attorney on one side to being an attorney for both, to now helping people have more of a team where there are mental health practitioners, and then handling the legal aspects. I guess I'm curious, what you can share for people who are either considering going through the divorce process or going through the divorce process that makes it, not legally necessarily, but from your own personal experience, right? Like, what has it go better?
It's interesting, and I can give you a few personal experiences that have led me in this direction, but basically what makes it go better is an unwillingness on the part of a couple to give away their decision-making control. Because when they hire two separate attorneys, they often do it because of the natural human inclination not to have to make a decision. And so they pass off that decision-making responsibility to their attorneys. And then ultimately, if the attorneys become combative or start battling, it's passed off to a judge. And judges in California, as in most states, are generally time limited. They have limited time to deal with issues that they're presented with, and that is not a good thing for anyone. So my view came from my own experience, which was when I was, let me put it a different way. A number of years ago, my wife passed away, and so after a period of being basically single for quite a long time, I remarried, and I remarried a girl. I've always been pretty active and fortunately had great stamina and ability to do the things I wanted to do. So I ended up marrying a girl quite a bit younger than I was, and ultimately we ended up in a divorce. Yeah. And the divorce was acrimonious. It was very unpleasant, and it took an incredible amount of time. It lasted, it seemed, forever. Wow. It was very expensive, and I it was funny because I really I still had great affection for the girl, even though we were in the process of divorce.
Yeah.
And would have just pretty much given her everything, but there was an inclination to fight, and unfortunately, I guess it goes back to my old athletic career. I've always been reasonably competitive, and so we fought. And I discovered the dysfunction of the system, which has no ability. One of the reasons I say everybody who's divorcing, every divorcing couple needs a parting properly divorce mentor is because attorneys are simply not trained in the way to deal with problem solving without advocating. And so we got that, and that kicked me off into a sort of a quest.
So you didn't actually have anyone who was helping you problem solve. It was more just the legality.
Attorneys are very well trained in how to define what is community, what is separate property under the law, about how to apply what's called the disometer to determine, which was actually developed in 1970.
I remember the disometer. I've done that.
Yeah, which is still being used. How to apply that to determine support, both child and spousal support. And they have great skills in that area, but they don't always have the skills to say to someone, look, back off. This is something that should be settled. We don't need to fight about this.
Yeah.
And so if
I appreciate the wisdom that you've gained of like, wow, what if we actually don't have to fight about this at all? I mean, granted, it's a tender topic, and like you've said, sometimes one person wants it more than another, and so it can be really emotionally challenging. But what I've seen in talking to you is that you have a vision for how to support couples to actually go through it with less pain and less combativeness.
That's true. And it was a developing process. I read a lot, and one of the things that I have learned is that when you do that, you end up finding little nuggets here and there. If you read Benjamin Franklin or you read Bill Bennett's Book of Virtues, you always find little nuggets. And one of my favorite things to do is to find new books that I hadn't encountered before. And I started reading things like Miguel Ruiz wrote a book called The Four Agreements that I'm sure some listeners will be familiar with. And basically, it's based upon what he called a Toltec wisdom, but the wisdom is pretty simple. It's basically, as we go through life, we make agreements with ourselves, and some of them are simple. You use a fork and a knife rather than your fingers to eat off a plate. Some of them are more complex, and that's what mental health professionals deal with. The therapists deal with the fact that we've made agreements with ourselves that are not productive and are often self-defeating. And his idea was very simple. You have 4 things that you need to have agreements about. You need to always keep your word, be impeccable with your word. You need to not take anything personally. You need to basically to not have any expectations and anticipate that you're entitled to something. And the last one is you do your best. And reading those books. So I recommend those books. I recommend a book called Mindset, which is about having a positive or a negative mindset and the consequences of that. I also like Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, because it really is. And his experience going through the Holocaust and then coming out and creating what he calls logotherapy, which is basically logo meaning mind, is useful. And I often recommend those books to people that I'm working with, because I find that it's all about mindset and exactly, if you go into and as I mentioned, and you mentioned actually, most divorces come to me and one person wants the divorce more than the other person does. Oftentimes people are saying, a wife will say, well, I want a divorce, and the husband says, let's work it out. And ultimately gets to the point where there's no way to work it out. And unfortunately, and we always are aware of this, if there's still a way to mend the relationship, we, sometimes defer things, we sometimes suggest things. If there's no way to mend the relationship, then the thing to do is get it over quickly, as efficiently and with as much application of practicality and common sense as possible. And the least expensively.
That makes me laugh as my divorce went pretty well, but it took us about 4 years to do it. But I'm appreciating, the fact that you're actually giving people books to read about mindset and about taking things personally and about not having expectations or entitlements. I mean, one of the things that I feel about divorce is while it can be one of the most painful experiences in life, it also can be an opportunity to learn about ourselves and deepen our commitment to ourselves and our understanding of ourselves and grow in what it means to actually love, and then find another relationship where we can actually love better and more fully. And, one of the things that strikes me about divorce is, especially having a child, is that divorce it's not like we actually get to end the relationship, right? Like it's a transition into a new form of relationship, but I still have to interact with my ex all the time because we're both navigating how to care for a little being. So, I think it often, from the legal perspective, it's like, okay, well, this is ending, but what I see you doing is also really acknowledging this is a relationship. These are people. This is an ongoing situation. So how do we actually navigate this with as much consciousness as possible?
I wish all of the people that come to me would have that degree of wisdom that you've just expressed, because it is absolutely a situation where this is an interruption of a period of people's lives, and it obviously requires change, but it doesn't, as you pointed out, end the relationship. And when you fight, you do two things. You basically waste time, and time is the one commodity, irreplaceable, that is probably most valuable. And so don't waste the time. You don't want to spend a lot of money. One of the unfortunate things about fighting is that when an attorney fights, his fees go up. When he delays, fees go up.
Interesting.
And so one of the things that I did when we first started conceiving the basis and the manner in which we operate parting properly, we cap our fees. We at the beginning say, we think this ending this relationship will take a certain number of hours, and we're willing to bet on that.
Wow.
Based on experience and what you've told us about where you are and our perception after our meeting, we always meet face to face before we decide on the cap on our fees. And we say, at this point, I think divorce will take, 25 or 30 hours of our time. We will cap our fees at that point. If it takes more, it's not on, you're off the clock.
Wow. That's really generous of you.
Well, it's worked out well. It's surprising. You oftentimes can see that it's going to take some time because sometimes there are some complicated issues. And fortunately, we have a lot of people that we have access to, certified divorce financial analysts and CPAs and other people who sometimes are called in to give assistance. We have also obviously our own people who assist us with structuring co-parenting agreements and that sort of thing. But most of our mentors are, pretty well experienced. And the one thing I found, and I hadn't really realized this because frankly, I've never been in therapy, but I probably have 5,000 or 6,000 therapists with my connections one way or another. And what I discover is that they're really focused on improving their skills in dealing with people's problems. And if you're a LinkedIn devotee, why you get messages every day about some new opportunity to learn about how better to solve problems. And so one of the things we can do is, as couples come to us, we basically assess what their needs are, and then we approach it on a needs basis. We don't do more than is necessary, but we try to do exactly what is necessary to do the other thing that you're so wise about, which is to empower them to go forward with their lives. And go forward, particularly if there are children involved, with their ex spouse, to deal with the lives of their children. And
And one of the things that you mentioned at one point in our conversation is forgiveness. And I'm wondering what your perspective, again, seeing all of these couples go through divorce, what do you see, the role of forgiveness in divorce?
It's interesting. I have basically a Christian religious background. I'm also sort of a Buddhist, and I do Qigong and Tai Chi exercises every morning. Mm-hmm. And so you can learn from every culture and ethnic group certain things about life. Confucius was pretty smart. Buddha was certainly very, very intelligent. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I try to help people learn, and some have already learned, but many have learned it in kindergarten and then forgotten it, and is the fact that you don't have to go through life carrying a big sack of rocks on your back. Yeah. Unless you decide to, which of course is the Viktor Frankl model of controlling your decision-making process. If you decide you're not, and regardless of what people say, well, this is, the basis, and this is why I'm angry, and this is why I won't forgive, and that sort of thing. The bottom line is, it's always just a decision. They're deciding, I'm not going to, it's more fun for me not to forgive than to forgive. And in doing so, they're putting hobbles on their ankles, they're putting rocks on their backs. Forgiveness is really simple. It almost never has a significant effect on the person forgiven in terms of changing their life, but it always has a significant effect on the person who forgives.
Yeah, and it often seems to me like a lot of people think of forgiveness as, well, if I forgive, then I'm condoning some kind of behavior or, something that happened. And I don't see it that way. And it sounds like you don't necessarily see it that way either.
No, I really don't. It's very interesting to watch people and see the burdens that are lifted when they finally can let things go. My grandchildren love the movie Frozen, and Let It Go is a pretty good song. Right. And so, and I hear that more often probably than I would like to.
Yes, but, I would imagine.
But, if people, I used to say years ago, even many years before I started this, that there are two kinds of people in the world. One kind is happy and the other kind is unhappy. The kind that are happy are people that express gratitude. The kind that are unhappy fail to express gratitude. And I found that.
Yeah, no, keep going. I had a thought, but keep going.
I found that to be a truth. Yeah. If you're grateful for things and if you wake up in the morning and express your appreciation for your life. The other thing that's been involved my life that has given me this sort of interesting perspective is my wife, who passed away, had a condition called myotonic dystrophy, which is a muscular dystrophy, but she also had breast cancer, and that was the cause of her death. Yeah. My son inherited that, and my son just passed away not long ago, but during his life, he progressed from a guy that spent 2 years on a mission in Peru, my most active child, climbing trees, skiing, doing all the things we did during his childhood and manhood, and then became, at about age 25, started the beginning of total incapacity. And when he passed away recently, he basically was literally totally incapacitated. And I've been unbelievably blessed to be his caretaker for quite a long time. And the reason it was such a blessing is that during that period, we're, progressing from a high level of activity to a very dependent status where, he couldn't feed himself or do any of those things. Mm-hmm. He never complained. Wow. He never once. Not in, and I may get a little emotional as I think about that, but because he was probably the most courageous person, and I've met a lot of people in my life and traveled all over the world, but he was the most courageous person I have ever met because he literally accepted his fate and lived through it and enjoyed the life that he was allowed to enjoy. Wow. I'm grateful that he is, I have a strong belief in an afterlife, and so I'm sure he's running and playing and jumping and laughing with his but that has a tendency to give you a perspective on what it means to be grateful. And so when I talk to people, or when I teach the mentors that are mental health professionals how to do what they do, I bring a perspective that is influenced significantly by my son Johnny's influence in my life. And so, it's easy to say to somebody honestly that don't waste your time.
Yeah.
Don't waste your time in lack of forgiveness. Don't waste your time in fighting over, the teacups. Don't waste your time in trying to prove that your spouse is a bad parent. Don't waste your time.
Yeah.
Deal with the situation as it exists. And one of the things, the other book that I read years ago, and I've sort of gotten away from an adulation of the author, a guy by the name of Eckhart Tolle that wrote a book called The Power of Now.
Yeah.
And it was greatly influencing. I've actually went to a couple of his lectures, and it was very influential in my thought process, and still is.
Yes.
I find it
a really powerful book, and he's a powerful teacher.
He is a powerful teacher, and he taught me a lot. But Sister Teresa had when she was operating the Calcutta Death House and dealing with the most horrible human conditions that you can imagine, over the lintel of her door to the death house was a simple statement. It said, "Yesterday is gone. Tomorrow is not yet here. We have today. Let us begin."
Wow. Oh, so beautiful. I mean, from the first moment we talked, I had a sense of how, I don't know if this will make sense, but how ripe and rich your heart is. It's like I can feel not just your intellectual wisdom, but how just how alive your heart is. And as we talk more and more about your son and about your experiences, I'm starting to understand why. And I feel really grateful that you're bringing this, to people who are going through a really challenging situation. And, gratitude, to me, it's not like, oh, because we're grateful, we're going to be, it's not all rainbows and butterflies and suddenly we're just happy all the time. But, I can recognize for myself, even in the situation of going through a divorce, I have gratitude for what it's allowed for me, right? For the deepenings, for the understandings, for the relationship with my son, for my spiritual practice. I mean, all these things. So again, thank you so much for bringing the depth and the wisdom into, one of the most challenging situations that a lot of people go through.
It is, it's people who define divorce as being the most challenging experience people have, other than the loss of a loved one,
right?
And a close loved one, and I find that that's the case. One of the things we do is we basically just say we have offices all over the state, but that we basically rent the offices because we found that the investment in bricks and mortar was not practical and was not helpful to our clients. But what we do is we make ourselves accessible. So a client can call me on Sunday morning at 2:00 in the morning, and I will respond.
Wow.
And that's true of all of our mentors. It almost never happens. In fact, I think it's only happened once in my career.
But that's a bold willingness to really be there for your people.
Well, and what happens is if you get a problem early, it doesn't become a serious problem, and oftentimes you head it off. But in addition to that, you find that people who are going through the process of divorce are finding it incredibly difficult, and particularly where children are involved.
Yeah.
And I have never found it to be otherwise. Even in the most cooperative, collaborative, kind, considerate divorce processes, there's still a lot of sadness.
Yeah.
And you can't alleviate sadness with anything but gratitude and love. And so you have to find the elements that you can be grateful for in your life.
Yes.
And even in your relationship, and even in a relationship with a person that you no longer feel affection or love for, you have to find something that they gave you for which you can be gratitude. And maybe it was just pain and you're learning how to deal with it, but there has to be an element of appreciation of life. And so one of the things we try to do is influence our clients to realize that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I think that feels like actually a beautiful place to end for now. That recognition of, right, even in the midst of pain, we can find that gratitude. So where can people find you if they're looking for more of you?
Well, all they have to do is on the internet is to simply search for Parting Properly. And that will get them to our website, and that will also get them to our ebook, which is about pre-divorce planning and divorce and what we do. Our website's pretty descriptive. Our telephone number is 888-765-4860, and pretty much that's available all the time. Sometimes it goes to a message machine if we're not available.
Great.
But Parting Properly is it's funny, I went through a lot of different names, and I ended up with Parting Properly. Mm-hmm. And so if you Google that, why, you'll find it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for doing this and sharing your love and hope and wisdom in the world.
Thank you, Shana. It's been my pleasure.
I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope it gives you a sense of what's possible and how good your life can be. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe to Man Alive and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to shanajamescoaching.com/manalive to get outtakes, videos, and raw footage I only share there. These are some of the most interesting parts of these expert conversations. You can also grab your copy of The Unknown Power to accelerate your career and solidify your confidence with women, because the two are related, and I know you don't have to settle for one or the other. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.